Hello and welcome back, everyone, to War Diplomacy, your trusted podcast on international relations and geopolitics. My name is Fabio Almada. I'm talking to you once again from Mexico, where I'm spending the summertime. I'm here with Armis Zinken in Vienna, right, Armis? How are you and how's the summer treating you?
Thanks, Fabio. I'm doing good, except for the allergies. I don't know. Vienna is killing me. I used to be in Egypt. There's absolutely no plant over there, so no allergies for me. And now coming back to Vienna, it's a little tough. But apart from that, it's great. And yeah, I hope to be moving to Brussels soon.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. The semester's about we could say the academic economic semester is about to start in September. So I'm sure interesting things are coming up for everyone. From my side, I'm still checking where I'll go. Maybe I'll go back to Paris, maybe Brussels, maybe I'll stay here in Mexico. Not really sure right now. We'll see how things go. But another thing that happened this summer, which I'm sure everyone is aware, it's this Barbieheimer phenomenon that flooded cinemas. You could see everyone wearing pink everywhere. It's been crazy in social media marketing. So yeah, but as much cute pink we've seen, I guess, and I think the world is more related to that bleak and dire feeling that we got when we left Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer movie. And as you can see, and as you can read from the title of this episode, we're going to talk about his legacy, and we're going to talk about nuclear deterrence and everything in this sense. So, just not to give a lot of spoilers, but as we know, the movie depicts the psychological effects of the construction of this bomb, the ramifications of its use, and we see Oppenheimer's role in the Manhattan Project and how he saw the development of the bombs. We saw his stance and how he shifted his perspective once he saw the destructive and devastating power of the bombs, right? So then he started to advocate for more restraint. He discoursed the creation of even more destructive weapons, right?
Yeah, Oppenheimer was opposed to the development of the hydrogen bomb as well, not only to the nuclear option. And the hydrogen bomb was known as the super bomb. And this bomb was 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. I would say that we don't spoil too much of the movie and move on to today's episode. We have a guest today, as usual, who provides us with expertise on the topic at hand. Fabio, can you introduce Vanda to us?
Absolutely. Well, I would love to introduce my dear colleague and friend, Vanda Proskova. Vanda, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's such an honor. I've been following you guys for a while, so I'm like fangirling today. Thank you for having me.
Same here. And for those that do not know Vanda, she's a graduate of international law who specializes on sustainable security. Last year, she was elected as one of 25 leaders for tomorrow by the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs and among 50 graduates of the OSCE, that's the Organization of Security and Cooperation of Europe, in a scholarship for peace and security. So outside of this security field, she also works as a communications and impact strategy consultant with multiple organizations, both in US and Europe. So honestly, from all of the people that I know, I think Vanda is the best one to talk with us about these topics of nuclear deterrence, arms control, and many other topics that we'll go further into today's topic. So thanks so much, Vanda. I don't know if you have any introductory things you'd like to say here in this first part before we go into matter.
I mean, it's such a cheery topic. I think we should just dive right in because there's a lot to cover.
So, yeah, Vanda, I fully agree with you. Let's get to the main point of this first block already. And why don't you introduce to us the topic of nuclear deterrence?
Sure. Okay, so I maybe it's good to start with just some facts, some theory. Basically, nuclear deterrence is a military doctrine which is assuming that an enemy will be deterred or discouraged from using nuclear weapons as long as they think that they can be destroyed as a consequence. So, hypothetically, if a country A launches a nuclear war against country B, country B will be able to inflict enough damage on country A that it would lead to what theorists call the mutually assured destruction. So, according to the deterrence theory, country A is aware of this, is aware of the potential consequence, and then rationally decides not to launch any attack in the first place. Now, we obviously know that, no nuclear war happened during Cold War, and ever since. But I'd be very skeptical as to, fully crediting nuclear deterrence with this achievement. I would be very skeptical even saying that nuclear deterrence 1000% works.
So would you also say the other way around, that also if there wasn't any nuclear weapon, then the Cold War and also the current times would also stay peaceful?
I wouldn't say that. I don't think it works that way. I think nuclear deterrence, the flaws it has, it's all based on the assumptions that a country will avoid starting a nuclear war in order to protect its own security or its own people. And that's very logical, that's very rational. But I mean, going into the present, can we be ever 100% certain that all world leaders always act 100% rationally? So this whole, all theories in IR, they all count on this rationality, on this assumption, and I just don't think that we can always be 100% certain. And secondly, we also need to account for the presence of the uncontrollables, or of all the variables, such as the misuse of nuclear weapons, if the control falls into the hands of the wrong people, or just simply errors. And during Cold War, there have been so many instances of a nuclear war almost occurring, and only being prevented by literally just pure luck, or a commander not following orders and literally saving the world. So no, I would be skeptical saying nuclear deterrence works, but I also would be skeptical saying that without nuclear weapons. I mean, there have been wars before we had nuclear weapons. I don't think the world would stop having wars if we got rid of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and the word peaceful from my side was also a little oversimplified, because, of course, during the Cold War, we saw a lot of proxy wars, but at least we didn't saw this major confrontation between the world powers. And yeah, that's something I think about a lot, because I feel like nuclear weapons actually prevented this and had a large influence here.
I'm no expert on the topic, but I at least from my understanding, or what use you could have with nuclear weapons would not be mostly its offensive element. Mostly it's that part that if you do have nuclear weapons, let's say just as Iran is trying to get them, you ensure that maybe a world power will not try to mess with your affairs, because there is a possibility that you could use them, of course. But that is just the theory, and just as Vanda is saying, I mean, we assume that leaders are rational, but now we are, or we were listening Putin talking all the time about the use of these weapons, even if their use is not needed, right? Like the rhetorical element, it's as powerful as the weapon. Like, I guess sometimes you don't really need to use the weapon itself. Just the fact of having it puts you in a different level. And we can talk about North Korea, Iran, Russia, along those lines. But accidents can happen, regiments can fall. And just as Vanda has said, what could happen if another actor gets hold on this, right? Like, it complicates the issue. We will never get to know a world where nuclear weapons were not invented, right? So there's not ifs. But I don't know, Vanda, how do you see those things?
I mean, one thing that is true in terms of what maybe nuclear weapons have improved in the world diplomacy is that all the countries that do possess nuclear weapons do realize how incredibly dangerous that is, and I do, at least I hope, that they acknowledge, the responsibility that comes with this great power. So during Cold War, one of the almost ends of the world was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that really, I think, for the US and the then USSR, really highlighted how close we were to complete disaster due to a complete fail of communication. So as a result to that, the US and the USSR established the so-called Moscow-Washington hotline, I think it was called, in 1963. It was sort of like a fax, or today is it's emails. And it was actually used many times since, like when JFK was assassinated. The two sides communicated simply because both sides realized that communication is key, and that they cannot risk a nuclear war due to a miscommunication. So yeah, I think maybe it was the fact that both sides realized the incredible danger coming from nukes, what actually kept the Cold War cold, and what kept it relatively civil
And
that
does this
front.
red line or hotline exist until today? Is it used also among other powers, not only Russia and the US, but also the US and China and the other nuclear powers?
So I don't know about any multilateral lines, but I know that, or at least I was told that the Moscow Washington hotline is still in use. It's not like I think it was also called the red telephone or something like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I think now it's like emails or works on internet technology, but I think they still do have it.
Interesting. I remember listening to Putin's speech. I think it was in the year anniversary of the conflict in Ukraine. How he said that he was going to get out of this treaty, right? The start, I think the New START
New
treaty, something
Start,
like that. Like,
yeah.
yeah, like these types of mechanisms where the U.S. And Russia would check on each other's arsenals. And I assumed that that meant that they were going to stop communicating on nuclear talks like at all, but not sure about it.
Yeah, I mean, so New Start, by the way, signed in Prague, my hometown, so a favorite treaty of mine. It followed up on the older START treaties. All of them were bilateral treaties between the US and Russia, and all of them had the goal of limiting the number of strategic nuclear missile launches. And they also set, at least the New START set, a verification regime in place. So basically, the treaty wanted to decrease the numbers of nukes owned by the US and Russia. And actually, it did work, at least for a while. There is now fewer nuclear weapons owned by the two countries now that there were during, like, at the height of the Cold War. But you were right. In February 2023, Russia did say that they suspended its participation. But technically, they only said that they suspend the participation. They didn't withdraw from the treaty. And I think they also clarified that they would continue to abide by the numerical limits in the treaty, meaning that they should still technically be decreasing the numbers of stockpile. But this is high diplomacy. We can talk about how credible this is.
China, who's doing the exact opposite and not decreasing their arsenal, but actually increasing it. How does China impact the whole issue of nuclear stability on the global level?
Well, I mean, China is an interesting case for sure. I think it beautifully highlights how multipolar world we deal with now. Um, China, it's not just Russia and the US anymore. But one thing that's particularly interesting about China is that it actually has a no first use policy. And again, we can talk about the credibility of the statement, but basically a no first use policy means that the country claims that they would never use nuclear weapons as first. So that's sort of assuring. I think you're right, they are increasing the arsenals. I think now they have around 400 warheads. But just to put this into perspective, the US has almost 4,000 in stockpile, then almost 2,000 deployed. So in comparison to the States, it's still very, very marginal. As to the increasing, I think it's a political play. Biden's
Mhm.
administration says that China's increasing numbers do not pose, like, it's not a reason for the US to increase their arsenals. Of course, there's a couple of Republicans pushing for the opposite. So I think now it's really also, it depends on how the other states want to play it and how how much more military spending the
Yeah,
US can afford.
exactly. And it makes you think how many nuclear weapons do you need? What's the minimum requirement for you to be a nuclear power, right? Because I would say if you have a couple nuclear warheads, that's more than enough to be considered part of this ecosystem. And why would you require 5,000, 3,000, right? That's what
Oh,
comes to my mind when we talk about these numbers.
exactly, exactly. We did a research a couple of months ago, so I don't remember the numbers correctly. But there's a term, the overkill, and it basically means, like, how many times would a country be able to, like, kill the opponent, like destroy completely the whole country, and it's in hundreds. Like, the US could, like, kill the whole of Russia hundreds of time with the number of weapons they have, which is just insane. Also, taking into consideration how much the weapons actually cost. Like, it's such an expensive business. It's kind of ridiculous. Like in the States, particularly, they don't have, social security, health insurance, all of these basic things. Education being so expensive, but they're wasting billions and billions of dollars every year on this weapon that they technically plan on never using.
Yeah,
So what's the
that's the
point
thing.
of
And
having so many weapons? Is there any like reasonable argument coming to your mind here?
Ooh, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and say that I obviously do come from like the nuclear disarmament perspective, so deterrence is not my favorite argument, but I would almost play the political lobbying card. There's a beautiful instance. I think it was sometime at the beginning of Obama's presidency, so 2008, or around that time. And Obama came and he wanted to decrease the number of weapons, right? That obviously needs to be signed by the House, the Senate. And the Republicans, all of them, said that yes, they would sign, they would agree with the US having fewer, so getting rid of some of their nukes, but on one condition, and the condition being that more money would go into the nuclear arsenals. So basically, the Republicans were saying, okay, we're going to have fewer weapons, but they're going to be like, we're going to put more money into this. I think it showcases how incredibly powerful the lobbying power of the nuclear corporations is in the States, but worldwide. The business behind nuclear weapons is so huge. It's mind-blowing. It's hard to me to even imagine the money that flows into that system.
And guys, I think this was like a perfect bridge to jump into the second block of today's topic, which is exactly what we're talking right now. Current arms control and nuclear disarmament, which, Vanda, I'm sure that with all of your experience working in UN environments, you're going to give great insights. So maybe I would just like to ask you if you could develop a little bit, how is the UN trying to work on these issues? How do you see nuclear powers playing into these ecosystems? And yeah, if maybe you could just give us a little bit of an insight on these topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, again, a little bit of a background. There's basically two parts to this. One is the disarmament trend, and the second is the non-proliferation. In very simple terms, disarmament means that countries that own the weapons are giving them up, and non-proliferation means that no more actors and no more states are acquiring the weapons. In a way, it's easier to push and control non-proliferation just because it's easier to just like not give them to or not help another state to acquire it. But disarmament is the ultimate end goal for the UN. I mean, the first ever resolution passed at the UN was about nuclear disarmament and nuclear control. As dysfunctional as it may seem, it is the only organization that's connecting the whole world. It's not perfect by any means, but it can be a useful tool, a platform for negotiations, for engagement, for international law. But at the end of the day, it really goes to the member states. No progress will ever be made until the member states decide that they do want to have progress. So what the UN does, aside from providing the space for negotiations and communication, it functions as a depository for multiple treaties. So, for example, the NPT, which is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the CTBT, which is a Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, or now, for example, the new TPNW, which is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. All of these treaties have a completely different angle. We can unpack them a little bit if you guys want. Some treaties don't work fully. The CTBT, for example, hasn't even entered into force yet. So there's different mechanisms of international law that the UN is facilitating that is helping us to get to nuclear abolition.
I mean, if we implemented nuclear disarmament and every country in the world would pledge to get rid of their nukes, then my initial thought would be that would be kind of dangerous, because For example, there's a lot of discussion surrounding Iran at the moment because some argued that they already have nukes, some argued that they don't have the nukes, and even when this regime was in place that controlled whether Iran had nukes or not, some actors claimed that they're still not sure whether Iran actually developed the nuclear capabilities, if I'm not mistaken here. So what I would be afraid of is that in this potential scenario, a country like Russia says, yeah, sure, we don't have any nukes. But on the other hand, it's the biggest country in the world. The territory is huge. And just in theory, from my perspective, wouldn't it be easy to just secretly develop nuclear weapons and then have like a huge potential on the world stage, being the only actor that possesses nukes?
Well, you're right in terms of that it's a lot about trust. The nuclear disarmament regime, it's got a lot of biases, and honestly, like it's a little bit racist in a way. Like for example, with the West basically pushing the Middle East to become a nuclear weapon-free zone, while the West is very much a nuclear weapon territory. They're basically saying like it's okay that we have them, but we don't trust you to have them. I think that's a little bit, on the nose. I think part of the international law and the norms that are being created are actually signaling that eventually, in a couple of decades, maybe even longer, we will get to a world when we will have this global norm that the use of nuclear weapons is just unacceptable. We've achieved it with biological weapons, with chemical weapons. I do believe that eventually we'll get there with nuclear weapons as well, but it's a lot about the member states. So, for example, the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, was signed already in the 1960s. It's one of the oldest treaties out there. It's the only treaty which connects all of the original nuclear club. So China, France, Russia, the UK, and the US. But obviously now there are more nuclear weapon states. India, Pakistan, Korea, obviously, Israel. So we can talk about how effective that treaty is. But it provides us with avenues where we can connect and engage. So for example, the NPT specifically, it's got its review conferences and then preparatory committees for these conferences. One was actually just happening in Vienna at the beginning of August. So it serves as a platform for states to communicate. Another fun treaty is the CTBT, which basically it stands for the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and it basically bans all nuclear explosions. The treaty is not even in force yet. It hasn't been ratified by enough states for it to enter into force, but it has already created a fantastic customary international law, so that pretty much no one aside from North Korea is now testing nuclear weapons or doing nuclear explosions. And that's a huge progress. So already now we have this norm that even though, yes, we do have nuclear weapon states, they're not testing their nuclear weapons. And that also, not being able to test your weapons means that you can't really modernize them. You can't modernize something unless you test it. So the nuclear weapons we have are, in a way, getting older and older. So this treaty actually is a huge step in the right direction. Now we have the TPNW that's entered into force a couple of years ago. It's a new treaty. It bans all the nukes, but of course, only states that don't actually have any nuclear weapons have signed it. So it goes to the member states. There are treaties that have entered into force and don't work. We have treaties that haven't yet entered into force but do function perfectly. But it's about the political play that the member states are playing in the plenary. Not gonna lie.
And now that we're talking into treaties and states, I do want to highlight the fact of my region of Latin America and the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in the continent, the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which was signed here in Mexico in 1967. It's true that Argentina had a nuclear program back in the day, but I would say that this is the only region or you could say continent on Earth without nuclear weapons. And I don't know, I mean, just myself trying to put Latin American agenda every time that I have the chance.
I mean, I would fact check you just a tiny little bit. Yeah, you're absolutely right with the Treaty of I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, that one.
Tlatelolco.
Anyways.
That's close
Mhm,
enough. Close enough.
mhm, mhm, mhm. No,
Hard
but
name
if
to
you,
pronounce.
well, I'll learn one day, I promise. No, but if you look at the word map, basically like half of the world already is nuclear weapon free. There is at least seven, eight, nine different treaties that establish nuclear weapon free areas. So basically, a whole of Africa is nuclear weapon free. We've got the Australia and the Asia Pacific that's nuclear weapon free. We've got the Outer Space Treaty. We've got the Antarctic Treaty. So there are a lot of pretty much almost the
Wow.
whole South is nuclear weapon free, which is pretty cool.
Well, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Actually, yeah, I just took a quick Google check, and yeah, you're totally right about it. It's basically most of the global south that it's nuclear-free zones. That's crazy. Also, the Outer Space Treaty, I find that really interesting. I mean, the fact that that leaders sign an agreement not to have nuclear weapons in space, that's incredible.
Yeah, I think it really shows that, they do, at the end of the day, they do respect the horrors a nuclear accident could bring.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a couple weeks ago, our correspondent in Ukraine, Alexei, went to visit Chernobyl, and he gave us a little tour of how things look in there, and it's crazy. I mean, the whole town got pretty much evacuated. It's crazy. Imagine if that happens today in I don't know, in Zaporizhia or in any other place with a nuclear facility, because it's not just the use of nuclear weapons. It's the nuclear aspect of things, right? Like how wrong things can go, and the terrible environmental and population consequences that has on people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Zaporizhia is actually a very, very good example. This is the first time in history that a nuclear facility or nuclear power plant is being used in armed conflict. It's so unprecedented. People like remember the news when it first got claimed by the Russians. People are so nervous about it, even though, of course, it's been out of power for the past year. And according to experts, it wouldn't, even if there was a technical issue in Zaporizhia, it wouldn't cause that big of a security issue as, for example, Chernobyl did. But it's still an incredibly dangerous territory. So yeah, it's not just about the nuclear weapons for sure.
So in February this year, just before the anniversary of Russia's invasion, Putin declared that Moscow would suspend its involvement in New START, as we've already discussed today. And the only remaining arms control agreement between two nuclear powers is gone with that. So even when relations between the signatories were tricky, the weapons inspectors quietly and diligently got on with their jobs of making the world a slightly safer space. But Russia was periodically threatening to use nuclear weapons, while NATO warned of severe consequences if it did use them. Apparently, after Xi Jinping's intervention, the nuclear dimension of the war gets significantly reduced. But nevertheless, we want to ask, how probable is it that we'll see the use of a nuclear device in the current Russo-Ukrainian war?
That's a really, really good question. And I think the biggest issue with nuclear weapons is that we simply do not know. We don't know if anyone will ever use them. No one knows. That's the issue. That being said, I personally do not believe either Russia, China, the States, or any other nuclear power would actually want to use them on purpose. They're all well aware of the impacts this would have. There would be literal global starvation. The death rates would go through the roof globally. They know that a nuclear counterattack would assure their destruction. So I do not think that nuclear weapons would be actually used on purpose in conflict. I mean, it's not that long ago that Kim Jong-un and Trump, former US president, had the insane exchange, and then Trump was tweeting about the big red button that's bigger than Kim's. And even those two actual psychopaths, I think, realized how dangerous these weapons were. That being said, statistically, changes of a nuclear accident happening is increasing every year. Russia's weapons in Belarus would only increase those chances. US weapons in Turkey or anywhere else are increasing those chances. Honestly, all nuclear weapons anywhere are increasing those chances. There's been notes of a missile being forgotten about at a random airport, a nuclear missile accidentally falling off a plane because it wasn't secured properly. There's so many almost incidents happening that we don't often also hear about because they're obviously not for the public eye. So I really do see nuclear disarmament as the only reliable prevention. It's actually insane. Like there's been
Forgetting it on an airport. Wow.
it's absolutely, and it's not even that long ago, but have you heard about the Hawaii what was it called? Hawaii false alarm?
Please tell us more about it.
Basically what happened in 2018 is that all residents of Hawaii, the state of Hawaii in the States, received an emergency alert on their phones saying that there is ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii and that they should seek immediate shelter and that it's not a drill. And it took the US 38 minutes to send them a follow-up saying that it was a false alarm. So basically an error in 2018, an error text message went to all of the residents saying that there is nuclear weapons flying at them. And this is 2018. Like this should not be happening in 2018. Those people for
Yeah.
40 minutes, for almost an hour, they genuinely thought they were going to die. That's such a horrific experience. And in a Western country, it's just absolutely mortifying to even think about these things. These accidents, there's records of horrible things happening. There's multiple accounts of people who literally saved the world by not following the orders of their chain of commands. There's people who we own this planet to, and as long as there are nuclear weapons on this earth, chances are any of this could happen again, either by accident or by a psycho telling someone to launch the missile. So yeah, good times.
So Wanda, what would happen if someone was crazy enough to use a nuke? And what would happen, let's say, in the case of Russia, if Putin decided to take the nuclear option and use a so-called tactical nuclear bomb in the war in Ukraine? How would the West retaliate, and how would the potential reaction to the retaliation look like? I know it's hard to predict, but I assume there are some likely scenarios being discussed here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it very much depends on who uses them and how. The Russia case is so particular just because, Ukraine, it's literally the border of their territory. They would be absolutely insane to use nuclear weapons in that specific conflict. The same goes if the West wanted to harm Russia, they would risk so many lives of so many people in the neighboring countries. That again, I do not think it's likely. That being said, there's numerous research pieces done on even tiny regional conflicts. So, for example, India and Pakistan, both nuclear weapon countries. And there was a research done by an American university, maybe the University of Texas. Don't quote me on this. An American university. That even such small regional conflict with, a small weapon that wouldn't be that big of a power, it would only be used locally, would still lead to immediate destruction of whole cities, firestorms, nuclear winter, widespread of radiation, temporary loss of modern technology. The impact really would be global. We live in such a globalized world that even if we take one continent or even one part of a continent out of the equation, there is starvation that we need to think of. We need to think about the environmental consequences. it would very much be just
Catastrophic, absolutely.
catastrophic for the whole planet, though, not just for the continent.
When you open up a taboo, once a nuclear weapon is used again in conflict, I mean, you open up a whole new chapter of human history would start then. I was really afraid last year when there was this rhetoric by Russia of the use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and I was praying for this not to happen because I was sure I would not like to live in a world where nuclear weapons are used in conflict again. They were used twice, and let's just hope they are never used again for the sake of humanity. We already have enough problems to now have another one.
Exactly. I've got 99 problems, and nuclear war doesn't need to be one of them.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. But anyways, guys, I think this was such an interesting topic to discuss. And Vanda, I wanted to have you on the show for a long time, to be honest. And now with the whole phenomenon of Oppenheimer being everywhere, I was just like, this is the right moment to talk about nuclear again. So thank you so much for the conversation. It was really insightful. I've learned a lot. I don't know about you, Armis, but I've learned a lot.
Me too. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Wanda, for being on the show. And thank you to our dear listeners for joining us today. And we look forward to the next time.
Should we do a little spoiler, Armis? Because we kind of know what we're going to talk about in the next one. Should we or should we not? You let
Absolutely.
me know.
You do the spoiler.
Well, we've been just following on this trend of nuclear and stuff. We thought it could be interesting to maybe deep a little bit more into Iran and the nuclear agreement that it's on the table there. So yeah, that might be the topic for next episode. So please keep your eyes open for our socials. And here we are. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thanks so much, Armis and Vanda, for your time. See you in the next one.